Welcome to AP English Flipped Grammar Unit. This is lesson 6 on commas. This is another PowerPoint that I did not personally create. I'm using the one that the guy from Capital Community College did because he has those interesting little squiggles where he can circle things and make lines and stuff, and I really like them. So I'm using his for this particular lesson. So what we're going to be talking about in this particular slide is lesson number 6, and that is common comma usage rules, if that makes sense. There are more than what are presented in this slide. In fact, I've got a really great single document for you. It's a PDF, two-sided. It actually lists 12 comma rules, but these are the main ones. These are the most common ones that you should be most concerned about. I highly recommend you print out that document though, because I think it's a great way to have all of the comma rules right there, easy to access in one simple document. So we have the first comma rule is that we will use a comma to set off elements of a series. If you have 3 or more things in a row, you want to put commas in between them, including the last 2. There's one there, and there's one there. Email, surfing the web, and using chat rooms. Now, that last comma, you might have learned it's not necessary, but you should use it. Because sometimes the last 2 items in the series, if you don't use that comma, they'll run together, and then it can cause some confusion. If you have questions about this, it's called a serial comma. You might have also heard it called an Oxford comma. I have a really great cartoon on the back wall of the classroom that illustrates why this Oxford comma is important. There may be an instance or 2 where you wouldn't want to do that, and if you don't think it's necessary, you can always ask me for clarification. Most of the time you want to make sure to use it so that your meaning is clear. Comma rule number 2, you want to use a comma and a coordinating conjunction anytime you join together 2 independent clauses. So if you use those coordinating conjunctions in order to create a compound sentence out of 2 independent clauses, you need a comma. So the public seems eager for some kind of gun control legislation, but there's our coordinating conjunction. The Congress is obviously too timid to enact any truly effective measures. If we're going to do those 2 independent clauses together with that but, we need that comma there. There are times when you might not need that comma, usually if they're short, but it's not ever wrong to put it in, so make sure that you always do that. Here's an example of something that might be okay without it. Our team is very good, but their team is better. They're very parallel. They're very short, so you don't need it, but it's never wrong to put it in. This one's really important, and it's one that I've seen in your summer work that I've read that you oftentimes miss. Anytime you have an introductory element to a sentence. So here we go. Anxious about the upcoming winter, settlers began to bicker amongst themselves. Okay, anxious about the upcoming winter is an introductory element. It is a phrase. It is modifying settlers. Another example, in the winter of 1644, that's a prepositional phrase. Nearly half the settlers died of starvation or exposure. Sometimes if the introductory element is really brief, if the sentence can be read easily without it, it can be omitted, but again, it's never wrong to put it in. So make sure you're always using that comma. That's the one that I find students miss the most. Here would be an example of one that is short and would not need that comma necessarily, but it wouldn't be wrong to put it in. Fourth comma rule, you want to always use a comma to separate coordinate adjectives. That just means when there's adjectives in a row, just like a list of nouns, you want to put commas in between them. So here we go. Coaches grew weary of running practices in the drafty, dreary, dilapidated gymnasium. The designs for an expensive, modern. Expensive and modern are both modifying gym, so we need that comma in between them. Sometimes if you could put you should remember that if you could put a but or an and in between the adjectives, you should put a comma in between them. So we might say expensive and modern. The gym was both expensive and modern, then you would use the comma. But a little old house would be correct because you wouldn't say a little and old house because it's not necessary. Fifth comma rule. You want to use a comma to set off elements that express a contrast or turn in the sentence. This is a place where you might not have two independent clauses, but if you're using words like but or not to indicate some sort of contrast between the beginning and the end, you can put that comma in between them to indicate that turn of events. So for example, the house was cute, but too expensive for the newlyweds. In this case, the but is not functioning to join two independent clauses, but since it's expressing something opposite of the house being cute, we can put that in there. Same deal with this one. They were looking for something practical, not luxurious. Obviously, that not is not luxurious is adding sort of a contrast to being practical. So even though it's not a complete sentence afterwards, it's not an independent clause, to show that contrast, we want to put that comma in there. Comma rule number 6, this is the one you learned way back in elementary school. You want to use it to set off states and countries, years, etc. in titles, just as, those sound effects are kind of obnoxious, just as you've always learned. Geneva, comma, Switzerland, but then was rescheduled for Chicago, comma, Illinois. Their wedding date was set for August 5th before the 2000 in the College Chapel in Newton, Massachusetts. We've got these extra ones right there. And finally, whoops, went a little bit too fast. Teresa Klondike, chair of the Ways and Means Committee. That is an appositive phrase that's modifying to Shonda Klondike. In that case, that would need to be set off by commas as well. That's her title. Seventh comma rule. You want to use a comma to set off quoted language. This one you're already very familiar with. Since this is not any new material, I won't elaborate much here. I'll just give you a moment to take a look at where these commas fall. Before the quotation mark when you're introducing a quote. Before the ending quotation marks if you are following up that quote with the same sentence. And then the third example here uses commas in both places because said the president is interjected in the middle of the sentence. Finally, one last comma rule. Anything that is a parenthetical element, that means something that's added information, something that you can take out of a sentence without changing the essential meaning. So sometimes it's hard to figure out what is added information and what's essential. So let's look at a couple of examples. Our first example is an appositive phrase. If it can be removed from a sentence without changing the meaning or making it confusing in any way, you should put commas around it. So for example, in this example, Robert Frost died when he was 88. We don't have to tell our reader that he was perhaps America's most beloved poet. That is a parenthetical appositive phrase. It's not necessary. We can take it out, so it should be set off by commas. An absolute phrase, and this has a parenthetical element. Here's an example of one. Frankly, comma, it doesn't seem to matter. That frankly, as your introductory word, needs a parenthetical element after it. If you are addressing someone, a person or people in the middle of a sentence, that's going to have commas around it too because it is parenthetical. Think of the word parenthetical as parentheses. If it's something that could go in parentheses because it's extra information, you would want to put it in there. So for example, I am warning you, good citizens of Hartford, this vote is crucial to the future of our city. Once again, it's not vital to our understanding of the sentence, but we are stating who we are addressing. Couple more examples, one more parenthetical element that we might want to talk about, and that would be an interjection. It's considered a parenthetical element and should be set off by commas. So first of all, excuse me is an interjection, so we would want to set off a comma to set that off. And then around the word of course, we would definitely want to use a comma. This is often where I see students use the word however in the middle of a sentence, and it's perfectly okay to use the word however there, but you got to separate it by those commas. I find that becomes confusing when you start using semicolons, and sometimes you'll just put the commas there, and that is going to take us right into our next slide. Whenever you put an interjection in there, if it's in the middle of the sentence and the sentence is continuing from before it until after it, you need to have those commas around it. And always want to point out, you don't want to overuse them. Students tend to get kind of comma happy. Use it when it's needed, not just because you think it sounds like there needs to be a pause there. There are a lot of instances where the pause seems natural, but a comma is not required. So understanding these rules and referencing these rules will help you to figure out how the sentences are put together, knowing what you know about clauses, and will help you certainly to make yourself look like a more intelligent, better writer. Stay tuned. Coming up, semicolons.